Welcome back. Before we have to cut away again for another break, I do want to talk to Marcela and our audience here because you were bringing out some points that the gentleman who had the internet message just a few minutes ago on the screen. It boils down to necessity versus luxury, as you were saying.
Yes, I was telling that actually the level of debate is quite, it's situated at two different levels. The one is talking about whether it's easier or not to learn a language at a certain age, and the other one is talking about the necessity of learning the language. And I sincerely believe that necessity overruns all kinds of luxury of whether it's early or late or not.
Yeah, Ron, is that the, I mean, what is in this for you? I mean, you're a millionaire businessman behind this bill. You're not an educator. I'm just curious as to what is in this initiative for you and why you think it's...
It's very simple. I've been interested in the issue of bilingual education for many, many years. I come from a little bit of an immigrant background myself. My mother was born in Los Angeles, but grew up not speaking a word of English. She learned English very quickly and easily when she was a young child and did very well in it. I've always been very skeptical of why children are kept for years in programs where they're not taught English in the public schools instead of being taught English quickly. Then in 1996, I read a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times describing how a group of immigrant Latino parents in downtown Los Angeles had to start a public boycott of their local elementary school because the school was refusing to teach their children English. And that seemed strange to me. In other words, I'd always thought of bilingual education as being a failure. But there's a big difference between a program that's simply a failure and a program that's gone off the deep end to the point where parents have to carry picket signs because schools refuse to allow their children to learn English. Then I started checking the statistics in California more in detail and found out how bad they were. Again, 95% of the children every year in California are failing to learn English. And any program that has a 95% failure rate is not a program that we should keep up year after year after year. Latino immigrants want their children to learn English. They desperately want their children to learn English. And that's why all the statewide polls that have been conducted, 10 of them in the last year, show that we have very strong support, in some cases overwhelming support, among California's Asian and Latino immigrant population.
Okay, let me come back to that in just a minute, Ron. Miriam is you're a substitute teacher in Santa Barbara. Miriam, at bilingual classes?
I was a bilingual substitute teacher for about a year. I'm from Santa Barbara, and I can verify what the gentleman from San Francisco was saying, that most of the students are born in Santa Barbara. They're native to Santa Barbara. I taught all the classes in Spanish, math, history, everything was in Spanish. All the textbooks were in Spanish. Everything in the walls was on Spanish. And I taught them English probably 20 minutes a day at most. And I really think that it's up to the parents to teach the kids English. Because you go to the store and many of the parents, the kids couldn't buy anything. And I think that they should learn English if they're in America. That's the language, should be their primary language.
I need to get a response from Carlos Garcia out of that, and unfortunately we do have to go to a commercial. Carlos, so hang with us and we'll pick up with you when we come back in just a second.
Join our Talkback Live discussion. Phone us at 800-310-4266. Fax us at 888-310-4FAX. Or go online at cnn.com/talkback.
And welcome back to Talkback Live. We're talking about the value of bilingual education and whether English should be the language of the classroom. Before I invite a couple of other guests to join us, Miriam was just telling us a few moments ago, she's a substitute teacher in the Santa Barbara school system in bilingual classes, and then most of the kids that she had were born in Santa Barbara, yet by the 6th grade they didn't know any English. Mr. Garcia, I wanted you to answer that. I mean, how does this happen? I mean, that's clearly a system not working.
Well, in a lot of the cases is that we have very high migrant transit populations that move from one place to another. So they start in a program, then they move and they go somewhere else. So, you know, that is one of the issues that we have to deal with, because the students don't stay in the same school all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade. We have very few students that fall under that category that actually stay in the same school system. But I would like to refer to one of the issues that Mr. Unz brought up, and that is that, you know, this is being touted as being one of the new things to go back to programs like this. It's not, there's nothing new about this proposal. You know, people forget that prior to the mid-70s, we had immersion, full immersion education. We put students, all the Hispanic, Chicano students in Los Angeles were just put in submersion programs where they either sunk or they made it. And the reality is, you know, if you look at statistically the dropout rates then, the dropout rates were a lot higher than they are today. So, you know, I grew up here in Los Angeles. I went through that system. My primary language was Spanish. I had to learn that. I don't want to go back to the era where when we were playing in the playground, they'd stop us if we were speaking Spanish. They'd make us put our hands out, and they'd paddle our hands for speaking Spanish.
Hopefully that would not happen. Let's bring in our other couple of guests right now. Joining the conversation, Jaime Zapata, Associate Director of Public Relations at the National Association for Bilingual Education, and Alice Callaghan, Director of Las Familias del Pueblo, a community center for garment workers and their families. She led a boycott against a school that refused to teach immigrant children English. And welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
A few moments ago, I talked about how there is a bilingual program in Miami that seems to be working quite well, and I want to quote something from the Los Angeles Times that compares the two systems, and they say, in California, bilingual education is usually seen as a program just for students with limited English skills. But in Miami, bilingual education is sold as a program for everyone. In other words, immersing the children in two languages. Not that they're, you know, saying that they're just deficient in one, and therefore they have to learn one over the other. Your thoughts on that? To both of our new guests. Alice?
Yes. Dual immersion classes happen generally in upper middle class neighborhoods, and they're pretty much driven by English-speaking parents who want their children to learn another language. They're very expensive. They're very successful, but they're very expensive.
Though.
Excuse me?
That's not the case in Miami, though.
At the Coral Way School, or are you talking about in general?
Well, I'm just talking in general.
Right.
In Miami, where the population is so heavily Hispanic that they feel it is as necessary to their population that they know Spanish as English. In other words, they're both economically valid and necessary.
Right.
Bobbie, let me interject just 1 second. This two-way programs are not for just for middle-class Americans. I was in a two-way program in the South Bronx of New York in an extremely poor neighborhood with everything stacked against the children in that school district. And I think my English is fairly good. My Spanish, I think, is just as good. And those are the kinds of opportunities that a good bilingual education program can give you. Mr. Unz can have his opinions, but that's all they are. I could tell you that I think that he's thinking of running for political office, and that's why he's talking about 227, and that's why he's bashing bilingual education. But you know what? What they don't have a right to do, because those opinions are incorrect, is impose them on people, and that's what Proposition 227 does, is it establishes a one-size-fits-all mandate for all children in the state of California, and it doesn't give parents a choice, period. They can talk about so-called exemptions in the program that are absolutely impossible to meet when you look at the requirements. The fact is, this is one size fits all. It takes the choice away from parents, and it doesn't let them have a say whatsoever in how their children are educated.
If I can respond to that.
Let me have Alice have her say here. Go ahead.
Let me say, and I think this is really important for people to understand, nobody is opposed to people being bilingual. Only a fool would be opposed to people being bilingual. Proposition 227 has nothing to do with people being bilingual. What Proposition 227 addresses is the reality in California, which is Spanish language children are placed when they start school in kindergarten and in first grade in Spanish-only classes. I work with impoverished garment workers. They spend all day sewing sleeves and collars on blouses. It's not a future they want for their children. They know that unless their children learn to read and write, not simply speak, but read and write English well, they have no future in this country. They
you
may
know
be
what? My
poor,
mother
but
is
they're
a
not
garment
stupid.
worker, Alice. She's a poor garment worker. She works very hard as well, and she knew that I needed to not only learn English, but learn math, science, and all the other subjects that are part of an education. And she understood that if those subjects were taught to me in a language that I did not understand, I wasn't going to learn.
We got to go to break, but as we go to the commercial, Alan, a quick experience that you had.
Right. I grew up in New York City, and I went to the bilingual education there, and I think it's been a great success for myself. I've learned English just as good, and my Chinese has stayed with me also, and I think it's a great program.
Okay, we'll be back in just a minute. Continue this discussion.